My name is Sarah Elaine Whitmore. Well, Sarah Cole now, and I've never been prouder of a name in my life. I'm 36 years old. I'm a licensed real estate attorney based in Atlanta, Georgia. I run a boutique practice that handles property disputes, estate transfers, and contract litigation. I have 2 children, Nia, who is 7, and Elijah, who just turned 5 in September. My husband Marcus runs a logistics and freight company that he built from a $12,000 investment and a used cargo van back in 2013. We are, by every measure, a family that built something real. But none of that existed yet on the evening of March 14, 2015, the night my mother issued her ultimatum. I was 27. Marcus and I had been together for 2 years. We were standing in my parents' living room in Houston, the same house I grew up in, with the same cream-colored carpet and the same framed Quranic verses on the wall and the same smell of cardamom and fried onions that I will always, no matter what, associate with both comfort and pain. My mother stood near the fireplace. My father sat in his armchair, silent, the way he always was when my mother was performing. My younger sister Amara was somewhere in the kitchen, pretending not to listen. She always pretended not to listen. If you walk out that door with him, my mother said, her voice perfectly calm, you are no longer my daughter. She didn't scream it. That's what people don't understand. She didn't cry or beg or even raise her voice. She said it the way you'd read a legal clause. Flat, final, non-negotiable. Marcus was waiting in the car outside. We were supposed to go to dinner to celebrate our engagement. He had proposed 3 weeks earlier in Piedmont Park on a cold February evening, with a ring he'd custom ordered from a jeweler in Buckhead. He hadn't asked my father's permission, not because he was disrespectful, but because my father had already made clear in a private phone call that his answer would be no. Not because Marcus wasn't a good man. Not because he couldn't provide. Not because he had a bad character or a troubled past. 'Cause he was black. That was the whole reason. The only reason. Dressed up in words like culture and community and what will people say. But underneath all of it, naked and ugly. He was black, and they had decided that was disqualifying. I looked at my mother for a long moment. I thought about the 27 years I had spent being a good daughter. The straight A's. The law degree. The never once giving them a reason to worry. I thought about how I had folded myself into the shape they wanted over and over again, for nearly 3 decades. And then I picked up my coat and my purse and I walked out the door. Marcus looked up when I got in the car. He didn't say anything. He just reached over and held my hand. We got married 6 weeks later. Small ceremony. A handful of friends. A judge named Patricia Okafor who had the warmest smile I've ever seen. Not one person from my family attended. Not one. What my family didn't know, what they couldn't have known because they chose not to, is what the next 9 years looked like. They imagined, I'm sure, that I had made a reckless, emotional decision. That I would struggle. That I would eventually come crawling back, humbled and regretful, ready to admit I had been foolish. They were wrong. In 2016, Marcus landed his first major freight contract with a regional grocery distribution company in Georgia. It was a $340,000 annual contract. He hired 4 drivers. I helped him structure the LLC properly and reviewed every clause of the agreement. For free because he was my husband and that's what partners do. By 2018, Cole Logistics had 7 vehicles and 11 employees. By 2020, even through the chaos of the pandemic, they were doing $1.2 million in annual revenue because Marcus had pivoted to medical supply delivery and worked around the clock to keep it running. I passed the Georgia bar in 2016, opened my own practice in 2019, and by 2022 I had a client roster of 34 active property cases and a waiting list. We bought our house in Brookhaven in late 2019. 4 bedrooms, a backyard with a magnolia tree, a kitchen with a kind of natural light that makes everything look like a magazine photo. We paid $487,000. We put 25% down. We own it cleanly. Nia was born in 2017. Elijah in 2019. They are loud, curious, loved children who have never once in their lives felt like they were not enough. I built all of that without my mother's voice in my ear. Without my family's approval. Without anyone from Houston sending so much as a text message saying, "Congratulations." And I'm telling you this not to brag. I'm telling you this because it matters for what comes next. Because when my mother rang my doorbell that October morning, she wasn't ringing the doorbell of a broken woman who needed her. She was ringing the doorbell of someone who had spent 9 years becoming exactly who she was always supposed to be. And she had no idea. To understand what my mother's arrival meant, you need to understand what my family was like before I left. My parents had 3 children. My older brother Tariq, me, and my younger sister Amara. And from the time I was old enough to notice, the hierarchy was clear. Tariq was the heir, a son, the one whose name was said with weight. Every achievement of his was celebrated. His engineering degree, his job at a Houston oil company, his marriage to a Pakistani woman named Sadia that my parents arranged with the efficiency of a business merger. When Tariq bought his first home in Sugar Land, my mother called every aunt and uncle in the family to announce it. There was a dinner. There were gifts. Amara was the baby. The soft one. The one my mother worried about and protected. Every mistake Amara made was quietly cleaned up by the family, including a car accident in 2014 that cost $8,400 in damages that my father paid without a word. And then there was me. I was the middle child who was expected to perform without complaint and disappear without notice. I don't say that for sympathy. It's just an accurate description. My law degree was acknowledged with a single dinner at a Pakistani restaurant in Houston, and the comment from my mother. Now find a good husband before you get too old. I was 24. The exclusion wasn't always loud. That's the thing about this kind of family dynamic. It operates mostly in the quiet moments. The family WhatsApp group that I was removed from in 2016, officially because of a technical issue, unofficially because someone had decided I no longer counted. The cousin's wedding in Dallas in 2018. I found out through Instagram. 43 family members in formal clothes at a banquet hall, and I learned about it from a hashtag. The moment that stays with me most, though, the one I've turned over in my mind more times than I can count, happened in 2013, 2 years before I left. My father's older brother, my uncle Rafiq, passed away. He had no children. In the weeks after his death, there was a quiet conversation about his estate, a small piece of commercial property in Houston's East End and a savings account. I overheard my mother on the phone with my aunt, her voice low and careful. Rafiq wanted the property to go to Sarah. He put it in writing. But we'll need to handle this carefully. I was standing in the hallway outside the kitchen. I didn't say anything. I didn't confront her. I filed it away the way I file everything, quietly, precisely, in the part of my brain where important things go to wait. I never saw a will. No one ever spoke to me about any inheritance. The property was never mentioned again. Until 9 years later when I finally went looking. She came on a Tuesday, October 3rd. 8:14 in the morning. I've already told you what I was doing. Nia's lunch, Elijah and his cartoon, the ordinary rhythm of a Tuesday that had no reason to be anything other than ordinary. When I opened the door and saw her, my first emotion wasn't anger. It wasn't even surprise exactly. It was something closer to a strange, hollow recognition, like seeing a painting you grew up with suddenly hanging in the wrong house. She looked older. Course she did, 9 years is 9 years. Her hair was fully gray now. She was thinner than I remembered. She was wearing a beige shalwar kameez and carrying a large rolling suitcase and a tote bag from a Houston grocery store. "Beta," she said. "I need to stay here for a while." I stood in the doorway. I did not move aside. I did not say, "Come in," or "of course," or any of the reflexive, daughterly things that 9 years of conditioning might have produced in a different version of me. I said. How long is a while? She blinked. I don't think she expected that question. I think she expected the door to simply open, the way doors had always opened for her. A few weeks, she said. Maybe a little longer. Things have been difficult. What things? She looked uncomfortable. Your brother, there have been some issues. With a house. It's complicated. I just need somewhere to be for now. I later found out, through Amara, who texted me that evening for the first time in 4 years, that Tariq and Sadia had asked my mother to leave their home in Sugar Land. The details were murky. Something about money, something about boundaries, something about Sadia finally reaching a limit. The Crown Prince had apparently fumbled his inheritance. But standing in my doorway that morning, I didn't know any of that yet. What I knew was this. My mother had not said my name warmly. She had not asked about my children. Her grandchildren, 2 human beings who existed and had birthdays and personalities and names she had never once acknowledged. She had not said, I'm sorry. She had not said, I've missed you. She had not said anything that resembled an accounting of 9 years. She needed a place to stay. That was the transaction she was proposing. I let her in. I made her tea. Listened. And within 48 hours, the requests had already begun to expand. On Wednesday evening she mentioned, casually over dinner as though it were nothing, that she had some legal matters that needed attention. Property dispute. Something to do with my Uncle Rafiq's estate. She said it while looking at her plate. Not at me. I was thinking Marcus might know someone, she said. Or maybe you could look at some papers. I kept my face completely still. What kind of papers? Asked. Just some old documents, she said. From when Rafiq passed. There was some confusion about a property. Confusion. That was the word she chose. I excused myself after dinner, went to my home office, closed the door, and sat very still for about 4 minutes. Then I opened my laptop and started making calls. I had kept the memory of that overheard phone call for 11 years. Not written down anywhere. Not shared with anyone. Not even Marcus, not yet. Just stored, the way I store things that feel important but unresolved, in a quiet corner of my mind where I keep things that are waiting to become useful. Rafiq wanted the property to go to Sarah. He put it in writing. That was 2013. I was 23 years old. Still in law school. Still living in my parents' house in Houston, still believing. Naively I understand now. That families operated in something resembling good faith even when they were difficult. That even a family as hierarchical and controlling as mine would not cross the line from favoritism into something criminal. I was wrong about that last part. The property my mother had referenced that evening was a small commercial building on Harrisburg Boulevard in Houston's East End. 2847 Harrisburg. A 3,400 square foot single-story brick building that had housed a dry cleaning business called Gloria's Cleaners for over 20 years. When Uncle Rafiq died, the tenant, a woman named Gloria Tran, was still operating. The lease was current. The rent was $2,800 a month. I had never received a single dollar of it. Had never been told it existed. Had never been shown a document, a deed, a lease, a check stub. Nothing. For 11 years that building had been generating income. And for 11 years, that income had been going somewhere that was not to me. It took me 3 days to begin piecing together what had happened. 3 days of working in the evenings after the kids were in bed and Marcus was in the study, with a cup of tea going cold beside my laptop and a yellow legal pad filling up with notes. The Harris County Clerk's records are public. Property transfers, deed filings, probate records. All of it is indexed and searchable if you know the right databases, and I have spent my entire professional career knowing exactly which databases to search and what to look for when I get there. That is quite literally my job. Uncle Rafiq Whitmore, died on February 9, 2013, at Houston Methodist Hospital, following complications from a cardiac event. He was 61 years old. He had never married. He had no children. His estate was modest by most standards. The Harrisburg property, a savings account containing approximately $47,000, a paid-off car, and the contents of a small apartment in Midtown Houston. I found the probate case number inside 20 minutes. Harris County case number PR 2013-01847. I submitted a formal records request that evening and received the digital file the following morning. The will itself was 4 pages. Clean, professional, structured. It had been drafted in November 2011 by a Houston estate attorney named Gerald Obie, a well-regarded probate specialist with 30 years of practice. It was signed in Gerald Obie's office, witnessed by 2 of his staff members, and notarized correctly. There was nothing irregular about it. It was exactly what a carefully prepared will looks like. I scrolled to item 3, paragraph B. I read it 3 times. I bequeath the commercial property located at 2847 Harrisburg Boulevard, Houston, Texas 77003, along with all associated lease income, to my niece Sarah Amina Whitmore, daughter of my brother Khalid Whitmore, in recognition of her dedication to academic excellence and her character, which has always reminded me of the best parts of our family. Name. My full name. In a legally executed document prepared by a professional attorney 14 months before my uncle died. He had thought about me. He had chosen me. He had written it down in front of witnesses and had it notarized and filed with an attorney. All the things you do when you want something to be real, when you want something to survive you. I set my phone down on the desk. I sat with that for a moment. Then I kept reading. The property had been transferred, not to me, to an LLC. The LLC was named Whitmore Family Properties, LLC. It had been formed in March 2013, 38 days after Rafiq's death. The registered members listed in the formation documents were my father, Khalid Whitmore, my mother, Nazreen Whitmore, and my brother, Tariq Whitmore. I was not listed. I had never been contacted. No attorney had ever called me. No letter had ever arrived. Nothing. The probate records showed that an attorney, not Gerald Obie, a different attorney named Stuart Meadows, whose state bar profile I looked up and found to be largely unremarkable, had filed a supplementary document to the probate court claiming that the 2011 will had been superseded by a handwritten codicil. A codicil, for those unfamiliar, is an amendment to a will. It can be handwritten and still be legally valid in Texas, provided it meets certain requirements. I pulled the codicil. It was 2 paragraphs long, handwritten on what appeared to be standard notebook paper. It stated in brief that Rafiq had reconsidered the disposition of the Harrisburg property and wished it to pass instead to his brother Khalid's family collectively, to be administered through a family entity. It was dated December 14, 2012. I cross-referenced that date against the medical records I subsequently requested from Houston Methodist, a process that took 10 days and a formal authorization I was entitled to request as a named beneficiary of the original will. What those records showed was this. From December 3 through December 28, 2012, Rafiq Whitmore had been admitted to Houston Methodist's cardiac care unit following a second serious cardiac event. During that admission, he was prescribed a combination of medications, including high-dose beta-blockers, anticoagulants, and a sedative medication that his treating cardiologist documented as causing, and I am quoting from the clinical notes here, significant cognitive dulling, reduced executive function, and periods of confusion and disorientation. He was, according to his own doctors, not fully cognitively present for most of December 2012. And someone had produced a handwritten document, dated December 14th of that month, in which he supposedly changed his mind about a property he had carefully and deliberately left to me in a document prepared by a professional attorney 14 months earlier. I looked at the signature on the codicil. Then I pulled the signature from the 2011 will. Then I pulled Rafiq's signature from his car title, his apartment lease, his savings account signature card, all public or obtainable records. His signature, in every document I could find from before December 2012, was consistent. precise. A clean, deliberate cursive R, a controlled loop on the W. The signature on the codicil was shaky, loose. The letters didn't connect properly. The pressure was uneven. I have reviewed enough documents in my career to know the difference between a signature produced under normal conditions and one produced by someone who is ill, afraid, or not entirely in control of what they are signing. I stared at that signature for a long time. Then I did the math. The property had been generating $2,800 a month since February 2013. That was, as of October when my mother appeared at my door, 114 months of rental income. $2,800 times 114 equals $319,200. $319,200. In rent alone. The property itself. I had a commercial real estate colleague run an informal valuation based on comparable sales in the East End, which had gentrified considerably since 2013. His estimate: $575,000 to $610,000 in current market value. I was looking at somewhere between $850,000 and $930,000 in total value. Money and property that my uncle had left to me. That my family had redirected, through a document produced while a sick man lay in a hospital bed, into an LLC with their names on it. I closed my laptop. I walked to the kitchen and stood at the window for a long time, watching the magnolia tree move in the October wind. Then I picked up my phone and called Renee Alcott. Renee is a probate litigator based in Atlanta. I have co-counseled with her on 2 cases. She is meticulous, aggressive when the situation calls for it, and completely unsentimentally honest. The kind of lawyer you want when the stakes are real. "I need you to look at something," I said when she answered. "And I need you to tell me exactly what you see. Not what you think I want to hear. What you actually see. Send it over," she said. She called me back at 7:43 the following morning. "Sarah," she said. Her voice was very calm. "That's how I knew it was serious. This codicil is a problem. A real, significant, documentable problem. The signature alone is enough to open a challenge. The medical timeline makes it stronger. If the handwriting analysis supports what I'm already seeing, and I think it will, you have a viable fraud case." I exhaled slowly. "Okay," I said. "Let's build it." My mother had been in my house for 6 days when I made my first move. 6 days. And in that time, she had already begun to make herself comfortable in a way that I observed with the detached, analytical part of my brain that never fully switches off. The part that notices things, documents things, files things away under the appropriate mental category for later use. She had rearranged the products on the guest bathroom shelf. She had moved the decorative bowl on the entryway table. A ceramic piece Marcus and I bought on our 5th anniversary trip to Savannah, approximately 8 inches to the left, for no discernible reason. She had commented over our first dinner together that Nia seemed to be staying up very late for a 7-year-old, and that Elijah's hair was getting a little long. She said both things pleasantly, with the particular pleasantness of someone who has decided that pleasantness is a form of authority. She had not asked Nia what her favorite subject in school was. She had not asked Elijah what his favorite dinosaur was, a question that would have produced a 20-minute lecture that I personally find exhausting and completely wonderful. She had looked at my children the way you look at furniture in a house you're assessing, noting their presence, calculating their relevance, moving on. She was building residency in my home. She had not apologized for destroying 9 years of my life. On day 6, she raised the property again. We were having morning chai, a ritual she had reinserted into my mornings without asking, which I had allowed because I was not ready to show my hand. She was talking about Houston, about the neighborhood, about some relative's daughter who had recently gotten married. Normal conversation. The kind of conversation you have when you are pretending that 9 years didn't happen. And then, smoothly, without transition, "I've been thinking we should talk about Rafiq's property. There's been some trouble with the tenant. Tariq has been managing it, but he's very busy with his work, and I think it needs someone with real legal knowledge to look at it. To settle things quietly. She looked at me over her cup. You could help. Keep it in the family. Keep it in the family. I looked back at her. I thought about $319,200 in rent. I thought about a shaky signature on a piece of notebook paper. I thought about a man lying in a cardiac ward in December 2012, medicated and disoriented, while somewhere outside that hospital room someone made decisions about what he owned. Sure, I said. Send me whatever documents you have. Her shoulders dropped almost imperceptibly, a release of tension she hadn't realized she was holding. She thought that was agreement. She thought I was the same daughter who had spent 27 years folding herself into whatever shape was required. She was wrong. But I needed her to keep thinking she was right for a little while longer. That afternoon, I sent Renee the complete document package I had assembled. The original 2011 will, the suspicious codicil, the LLC formation records, the probate court filing, the medical records timeline, and a memorandum I had written laying out the chronology in precise detail. I included the cardiologist's clinical notes. I included the signature comparison analysis I had done informally, with notations, and I flagged it for professional forensic handwriting review. Renee filed a formal challenge to the probate outcome in Harris County within the week. The grounds were specific. Will fraud, undue influence over a testator during a period of documented cognitive impairment, and breach of fiduciary duty by the estate administrator. My father, Khalid Whitmore, had served as the estate administrator. He had been dead for 2 years, but the estate, the LLC, and the civil liability attached to decisions made during administration did not die with him. The remaining LLC members, my mother and my brother, inherited that exposure. I did not tell my mother any of this. I continued having morning chai with her. I continued making dinner. I continued being present and civil and, when the children were around, warm, because my children did not need to absorb whatever was happening between the adults in their house. Nia had already asked me once quietly while I was braiding her hair one evening, "Mama, is that lady your mom?" And I had said yes. And Nia had considered this for a moment and then said, "She doesn't hug you like a mom." And I had kept braiding and said, "You're very observant, baby. Because what else do you say?" On day 8, my mother asked if she could extend her stay to 2 months. She mentioned vaguely that Tariq's situation was more complicated than expected. I said, "We'll see." On day 10 I sat down with Marcus. Not because I needed his permission. He would not have tried to stop me regardless, and we both knew it. But because Marcus is my partner in the real sense of the word, the sense that means I don't carry things alone, and I had been carrying this for 10 days already. I told him everything. From the beginning. The overheard phone call in 2013. What I'd found in the Harris County records. Codicil. The medical timeline. The signature analysis. Renee's assessment. The filing. He listened to all of it without interrupting. Marcus is good at that. At being completely still and present when something matters. It's one of the things I noticed about him early on before I loved him, when I was still just noticing things about him. That he knew how to be in a room with hard information without flinching away from it. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then, "What do you need from me?" "Keep things normal," I said. "Be exactly who you always are. I need her comfortable. I need her to think that nothing is moving." He nodded once. Done. And he was. For the next week and a half, Marcus Cole was the most gracious host imaginable. He asked my mother if she needed anything. He drove her to a medical appointment she mentioned without making it into anything. He sat at dinner and participated in conversations about people he had never met and had no reason to care about. He said nothing about 9 years of silence. He said nothing about 2 grandchildren whose birthdays had passed unacknowledged year after year, while this woman lived 40 minutes from an airport that ran direct flights to Atlanta. He was, as he has consistently been in every situation I have watched him navigate, a better person than the circumstances required. considerably better than the people who had spent 9 years calling him unacceptable. Meanwhile, I was working. The tenant at 2847 Harrisburg, Gloria Tran, who had been pressing her shirts and hemming trousers and running her business in that building since before I graduated high school, was understandably confused when I called her. She had been paying rent to the Whitmore Family Properties LLC for 11 years. She had never met anyone named Sarah. She wasn't sure, she told me carefully, who actually owned her building. I explained in measured professional terms that there was an active legal challenge to the property's title and that the ownership question was currently before a court. I advised her that pending resolution, she should hold her rent payments rather than directing them to the LLC. I told her she would not be in breach of her lease for doing so. I would provide written documentation of the legal hold if her lease required it. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Honestly, I've never been comfortable with those people. I'll wait." I filed the documentation. I froze the rental income stream. Then I waited. 12 days later, on a Thursday morning, while my mother was in the guest room and my children were at school, I received a call from Renee. "The handwriting analyst came back," she said. 71% probability that the codicil signature was produced under conditions inconsistent with voluntary, unimpaired signing. In combination with the medical records, "Sarah, this is strong. This is genuinely strong." Thanked her. Hung up. I went back to the kitchen and washed the breakfast dishes. That evening, my mother asked me again about the property documents she'd mentioned sending. "Still waiting on some things from my end," I said pleasantly. She nodded and went back to her chai. 5 days later, Tarek called. The call came on a Thursday. 17 days after Renee filed the challenge. 19 days after my mother had appeared at my door with her suitcase and her requests and her complete absence of accountability. I was in my office when my phone rang. I looked at the screen. A Houston number I didn't have saved but recognized immediately. The same area code, the same exchange as my childhood home. I knew before I answered. "Sarah." His voice was older than I expected. Tighter. There was a quality to it I hadn't heard in the version of my brother I remembered. A kind of controlled tension, the voice of someone trying to sound calmer than they are. "Tarek." Pause. I let the pause sit. I have learned, over years of sitting across from opposing counsel in contentious negotiations, that the person who feels compelled to fill silence is usually the person who is afraid. "What are you doing?" he said finally. "I'm pursuing a legal matter related to our Uncle Rafiq's estate," I said. "I'm entitled to do that. As a named beneficiary of the original will, I have standing, and Renee has filed in the correct jurisdiction. You're going to destroy this family." I let that sentence exist in the air between us for a moment. I thought about what the word family had meant in practice, what it had looked like concretely over the past 9 years. The wedding I attended without them. The children they had never met. The birthdays that passed. The silence that arrived year after year, like a bill for a debt I hadn't incurred. "Tarek," I said, "the family made its decisions a long time ago. I'm just reading the paperwork." He tried several approaches. He reminded me that our father was gone, as though that were a shield rather than, in this legal context, a relevant fact about estate administration. He suggested I was being vindictive, which I noted without responding to, because vindictiveness is an emotion and what I was engaged in was a legal process. He told me the codicil was legitimate, that Rafiq had genuinely changed his mind, that the family had only been trying to honor his final wishes. I waited until he finished. "Tarek," I said, "your uncle was hospitalized with a serious cardiac event throughout December 2012. His own cardiologist documented significant cognitive impairment during that period. The codicil is dated December 14, 2012. The signature on it does not match any other signature Rafiq produced before or after that hospitalization. I have a forensic handwriting analyst's report. I have his medical records. and I have the original 2011 will drafted by a professional attorney that names me explicitly. Silence. There is still an opportunity to resolve this without it becoming more public than it needs to be, I said. That window is not unlimited. I'd suggest talking to your attorney and having them contact Renee. I gave him Renee's number. Then I ended the call. My mother came to me 2 evenings later. I had known this conversation was coming. Tarek had called her. I could tell from the shift in her manner that day. A new carefulness in how she moved through the house. A quietness that was different from her usual composed silence. She had spent the day, I think, doing what I had spent the previous 2 weeks doing. Thinking through what she knew, what she hadn't known, what she should have known. She sat across from me in the living room. The evening light was coming in sideways through the front windows, the kind of golden October light that makes everything look more significant than it might otherwise. She folded her hands in her lap. She looked at me. "Why didn't you tell me," she said, "that you knew about the property?" "Because you didn't ask," I said. "You came here asking for help. You asked me to look at documents. You asked Marcus if he knew people. You didn't ask whether I already knew what those documents contained." She absorbed that. "I didn't know about the codicil," she said after a moment. Her voice was quieter than I had heard it. "What it was. How it came to exist. Your father handled that. He told me Rafik had changed his mind. I believed him." I looked at her for a long time. I have spent my career learning to read people. Not perfectly, no one reads people perfectly, but well enough to understand when someone is performing and when someone is telling what they believe to be the truth. In that moment, with the October light and her folded hands, I believed her. Not completely. Not without the caveat that believing your husband without asking questions when a significant asset is being redirected away from your daughter is its own kind of choice. But I believed that she had not been the architect of it. "That may be," I said. "Renee's process will establish what each person knew and when. That's her job, not mine." "What do you want, Sarah?" she said. And for the first time since she had arrived, I heard something in her voice that sounded less like a woman who expected doors to open, and more like a woman who understood that she was in a room that operated by different rules than the one she was accustomed to. "What I've always wanted," I said. "To be treated as though I exist." She didn't respond to that. But something in her face shifted. Some calcification, some long-settled certainty. And I watched it move and I let it go. The legal process took 8 months from filing to resolution. The forensic handwriting analysis, commissioned through Renee's firm by a specialist in Houston, concluded with a 73% probability that the codicil signature had been produced under conditions inconsistent with voluntary, cognitively unimpaired signing. The medical records provided a documented timeline of impairment during the exact period in question. The probate court in Harris County, after reviewing the full evidentiary record, vacated the codicil in June of the following year. The Harrisburg property was formally transferred to me in July. I held the deed in my hands in Renee's conference room in Atlanta. A single sheet of paper, my name typed cleanly at the top, and I felt something I had not expected. Not triumph exactly, but a kind of settling. Like a room that had been slightly tilted for years finally finding level. The back rent, 17 months of payments that had been collected by the LLC after I froze the current stream, was addressed through negotiated settlement. Tarek's attorney and Renee spent 3 weeks working out the terms. The final agreement required Tarek to pay $192,000, structured over 24 months, directly into an account in my name. There was a mutual non-disparagement clause, which I signed without hesitation, because I had no interest in narrating this story publicly. I am only telling it now because enough time has passed and because I think it might matter to someone who needs to hear it. I did not pursue criminal charges. I considered it. Renee laid out the options with characteristic precision. Civil recovery was cleaner, more certain, less dependent on prosecutorial discretion, and frankly more financially meaningful. I agreed with her analysis. I also, And I want to be honest about this, did not want to spend years in criminal proceedings. I wanted my life back. I wanted my property. I wanted my mornings and my magnolia tree and my children's school pickups and my practice and my husband. I wanted everything I had built to continue growing undistracted. The $192,000 and the deed were enough. More than enough. My mother left my house on day 22. Not because I told her to leave. Amara, my youngest sister, who had been quietly present at the edges of this story for years, sending the occasional careful text, maintaining a thread of contact that I had appreciated more than I'd said, had called my mother and offered her a room. My mother chose to go. I think by then, she understood that my house operated on terms she hadn't fully prepared for. I drove her to Hartsfield Jackson on a gray November morning. We sat in the car at departures for a few minutes without speaking, the particular silence of two people who have too much to say and nowhere near enough language for it. Then she said, "Your children are beautiful." "I know," I said. "Nia looks like you." People say that. Outside, people moved past with their luggage, their ordinary lives in transit. "Marcus is a good man," she said. I turned and looked at her. Fully. The way I hadn't quite since she'd arrived. "I've known that since the night I walked out your door," I said. "I've never stopped knowing it." She didn't apologize. Not in words. Maybe she didn't have the words. Maybe she had spent so long being the authority in every room she entered that the vocabulary of genuine accountability had never developed. I don't know. I have stopped trying to explain her to myself. What I know is that she looked at me for a long moment, and something moved across her face, and then she got out of the car, and I watched her walk through the automatic doors, and then I sat alone in my car in the departures lane for about 45 seconds before a traffic officer politely indicated I should move along. I drove home. I pulled into the driveway of the house Marcus and I bought in Brookhaven, the house with a magnolia tree and the good kitchen light and 4 bedrooms and the sound of 2 children who are loud and healthy. And loved. And I sat in the car for a moment in the November quiet. And then the front door burst open and Elijah came flying out in his socks. No shoes, the child has never in his life voluntarily worn shoes inside the house. And Marcus appeared in the doorway behind him saying something about the cold, and Elijah pressed his face against my car window and made the most ridiculous fish face I have ever seen, and I laughed. Actually laughed. The kind that comes from somewhere low and real and unburdened. That is the moment I keep returning to. Not the deed. Not the wire transfer confirmation. Not the court order with its official seal and its formal language and everything it represented. Just my son's face against the glass. Marcus laughing in the doorway. Nia's voice from somewhere inside asking if we were having pasta for dinner. That is the life they said I couldn't have. They were wrong about that. They were wrong about Marcus. They were wrong about me. They were wrong about what I was capable of building in the silence they handed me. And they were wrong about what I would do when I finally had reason and standing and evidence enough to answer for it. I don't carry anger about it. I want to be precise about that because I think people expect the ending of a story like this to feel like rage finally released. Doesn't. Feels quieter than that. Feels like a room with the right amount of light. Feels like a door that finally swings the way it was always supposed to. On your terms, at your timing, in the direction you choose. Chose Marcus. I would choose him again. I would walk out that door 1,000 times. And the next time someone tells you that the person you love is not enough, that they are the wrong background, the wrong family, the wrong color, not what was planned for you, I want you to look at them very carefully. Because what they are really telling you is that they have decided to be wrong about you. And the most powerful thing you can do is let them.